Fontaine Futuristics, 1958. Turns out, that report about the Little Sisters orphanage was... Sullivan paused, shaking his head sadly. Well, it was all true. They stood outside the nursery, looking through the window in the door. A little barefooted, dark-haired girl in a tattered frock was huddled on a bed in a corner, staring into space and sucking her thumb. Ryan let out a long, slow breath. She's got a sea slug in her, and she's producing Adam. Yep. Apparently the slugs didn't produce the stuff fast enough, and using the girls worked to increase the production. The disgust dripped from Sullivan's voice. Indeed. You confirmed this with Suchong? Yes, sir. You want to ask him? We've got him under house arrest just down the hall. He gave out a sickly grin. Poetic justice. They're locked up together, him and Tenenbaum, in one of the rooms they had the kids in. I'll have a word with them. Ryan turned away from the door. Mr. Ryan? Ryan looked at him, frowning. Yes? What about the kids, locked up in there? Did we let them out? They are, I believe, actually orphans, yes? Yeah. One way or another. Orphans will need somewhere to stay. Perhaps when we find another way to produce Adam efficiently, we'll arrange for them to be adopted. Until then, he shrugged. They're better off here. Ryan could see that Sullivan was disappointed by that response. What do you want from me, Sullivan? These kids will be of use. In time, well, we'll see. Do you think we could proceed with our inspection now, Chief? Sure. Sullivan avoided his eyes. His voice was hoarse. This way, Mr. Ryan. They're down the hall. Just 2 doors down, Sullivan unlocked a nearly identical cell. When Sullivan opened the door, Ryan had to step back from the reek of an overflowing chamber pot in the corner of the nursery. Toys were scattered on the floor, along with tin plates of half-eaten food. Bridget Tenenbaum was huddled on the cot in the corner, just like the little girl in the previous cell, but with a buttoned lab coat instead of a frock. She was gnawing a knuckle, and the expression on her face was the same as the child's. Suchong stood with his back to the door, writing on the wall with crayon in Korean ideograms. He had covered several square yards with the enigmatic writing. Suchong, Ryan barked. Dr. Yi Suchong turned to Ryan, and he saw that one of the lenses of Suchong's glasses had been knocked out. There was a purplish mark across that side of his face, and his lip was split. Dr. Suchong tried to escape when we raided the place, Sullivan explained blandly. Had to crack him one with a truncheon. Suchong bowed. Suchong sorry about writing on the walls. A little dissertation, no paper to write on. And what's the dissertation on? Ryan asked, nostrils quivering from the stench of the chamber pot. Accumulation of harvestable Adam in splices, Suchong said. Possible methods of extraction. I see. Would you two like to be released from these quarters? Tenenbaum sat up, still gnawing her knuckle, looking at him attentively. Suchong only bowed. Then, Ryan went on, I'm going to need a loyalty oath, and the understanding that breaking that oath is agreeing to execution. We are in extreme times. Extreme measures are necessary. And Tenenbaum's voice came in a croak. The little ones. Suchong frowned and shot her a warning look. Ryan shrugged. They will continue here. We need the commodity. In time, we'll find some other way, but it seems you and Fontaine left us with this one, for now. And after all, the children have nowhere to go. Sullivan muttered something inaudible. Ryan looked at him. Something to say, Chief? Oh, no, Mr. Ryan.
Very good. Set guard on this place, but let these two go to their previous quarters and clean up. And see that Suchong gets new glasses.
Fort Frolic, Poseidon Plaza, 1958. Stepping out into Poseidon Plaza, Diane McClintock realized she felt no thrill, felt nothing at all, about winning so much money in the surprise games of chance casino. She fished in her purse for cigarettes, and it took some looking, because her purse was stuffed with the Rapture dollars she'd won, quite improbably on the higher-priced slot machines. She'd had an amazing run of luck, and it meant nothing to her. It felt like mockery, somehow. She couldn't spend the money on Park Avenue in New York, where she longed to be. She lit a cigarette, lingering outside the casino, reluctant to go home, the whirring slots and the agitated people wandering from one game to the next. They were better than no companions at all. She knew she could spend time with one of Andrew's friends, but they were hard to bear after all that had happened. Miss? It was a woman in a blue dress, a blue velvet cap. She had mousy brown hair, large dark eyes. She clutched a handbag to her. Miss, my name's Margie. I was wondering if you could bear us a donation. Who's us? Diane asked, blowing smoke at the ornate ceiling. You seem to be out here alone. Need money for kids at home? No, No. I'm with Atlas's people. Atlas? I've heard about him. Also heard about Robin Hood. I don't believe in him, either. Oh, Atlas is real, ma'am. Yeah? What's he like? A good man. Oh, yes. I trust him even more than Doctor. She broke off, glancing around. Diane smiled. More than Dr. Lamb, if that's who you were going to mention. I don't blame you for clamming up, Margie. Got traded from one radical ball team to another, huh? I guess you could say that. When she got arrested, I needed someone to... It doesn't matter. What's important is we're collecting money to help the poor around Rapture. Atlas, he buys canned goods and stuff like that. Hands it out. Diane snorted. All this talk of poor underclass around Rapture. Exaggerated from what I hear. The girl shook her head. I was there. I had to do some pretty awful things, just to keep going. Really? Is it that bad? There wasn't any other kind of, work? No, ma'am. Andrew says there's plenty of... Diane let it trail off, seeing the fear on the girl's face. Anyway, donations. Sure, here. She took a wad of cash from her purse and handed it over. More power to anyone who pisses off Andrew, but don't tell anyone that it came from me. Oh, thank you. Margie put the money in her handbag, took out a leaflet. Read this. It'll tell all about him. And then she hurried off into the shadows. Diane looked at the leaflet's heading. Yes, someone cares. Atlas knows it. Feels as if no one in Rapture cares. Fight for Atlas. Fight for the rights of the working man. Diane smiled, imagining Andrew's reaction to seeing the leaflet. She crumpled it up and threw it away. But the words loitered in her mind. Yes, someone cares. Apollo Square, 1958. I wish Ryan would take down that fucking gallows, Bill McDonough said as he and Wallace walked by, grimacing at the reek of dangling corpses, 4 bloated, purple-faced bodies turning slowly in 4 nooses. Looked like new ones since last time. It was bloody depressing. Bill was going to be glad to get his meeting with Sullivan over and hurry home to Elaine and Sophie tonight. A man didn't feel much like taking a turn in Rapture, with this kind of bleakness setting the black dog to snapping at his heels. What I can't figure is, said Roland Wallace as he and Bill walked across the trash-strewn floor of Apollo Square.
How Fontaine got all those splicers there to wait for the constables. They're too loony to recruit, aren't they?
Bill chuckled grimly.
You forget, mate. Those buggers will do anything for Adam. You have a point. So Fontaine bribed them with Adam, show up there, take on whoever comes, and the survivors get plenty more.
That's how I figure it. Right enough. Yeah, what's all this then? A big crowd was gathered in front of Artemis Suites, where a man stood on the steps addressing them.
Must be that fellow. Calls himself Atlas, Wallace said, his voice hushed.
All right. I've seen the pamphlets.
Started with pirate radio messages. Got people all worked up. Followers leaving graffiti about.
At least 75 people, most of them seeming to be still human, ostensibly, or not yet far into Adam, were gathered around this Atlas. He wore maintenance workers' coveralls, just one of the people. The man sounded vaguely familiar, but looking closer, Bill decided he didn't know him. Couldn't have forgotten a bloke like that, almost movie star handsome with his lush golden brown hair and cleft chin.
Now back home in Dublin, we had a sayin', bellowed Atlas in something like an Irish brogue. May the cat eat you, and may the devil eat the cat. Isn't that what's happened to us here? You bet it is, boyo. We've been eaten alive, twice. First by Rapture, and then by Ryan. There's no crake here, no fun for the working man, for that is reserved for the swells and their spoiled betties up in Olympus Heights. Come and start life anew in Rapture, he said. But that was the cat talking to the mouse, and the devil talking through the cat.
Hoots of agreement rang from the crowd.
Aye, Atlas went on, his voice carrying over all of Apollo Square. We have been lied to, and lied to again. They told us it was all free market here. But what happens? Ryan takes over Fontaine Futuristics. Takes it by force, he does. He starts in with curfews and blockades. Turns the place into a police state.
An approving roar at that. Ryan's hypocrisy hadn't gone unnoticed.
We were lured here, Atlas bellowed.
Lured from a slum in Queens or Dublin or Shanghai or London to a smaller slum under frigid water. Moving up, are we? Right. Moving from living 4 in a room to living 20 in a room. It's theft. Theft of our future, boyo. Theft of our hope. But there is another way. A way to real hope. A share the wealth program. Why should them hypocrites be allowed to accumulate 100 times, 200 times what a working man earns, when they get it 'cause of our hard work? We work while they sit up there in their penthouses, drinking champagne and puffing cigars. Imported cigars we ain't allowed to have. Why shouldn't every family be given basic allowance? 1,000, 2,000 Rapture dollars to live on? Roars of approval at that. His voice rose and rose again, with every word. Why should the wealth of Rapture belong only to a greedy few? Now, tell me that. Fists pop up, but they were shaking in agreement. Someone started chanting, Atlas! Atlas! And all the crowd took it up. Atlas! 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 Atlas had to thunder the words out to be heard over the rising chant. And if it's got to come to a fight, armed with Adam and armed with guns, then so be it. Like he's been taking notes from Sophia Lamb, Bill said in a low aside to Roland Wallace. But he's got his own style. More the working man's daddy.
Why, he's Huey P. Long, Wallace said.
What? That bloke from Louisiana?
No, I mean, he's borrowing from Long's playbook. The Kingfish, they called him. Down there in Baton Rouge. Kind of the southern rabble-rousers. The Kingfish talked exactly like this, except for the Irish accent. And Atlas tossed in a little Bolshevism.
Bill shook his head, puzzling over it. Strange. I ain't even seen this bloke Atlas before. Been here for years, thought I'd seen every wanker in this big leaky tank of a town.
Wallace gave him a poke in the ribs with an elbow. Bill, look up there. Bill looked at the ceiling and saw spider splicers creeping across it, upside down, coming from 3 directions, converging right above him and Wallace. He looked around the edges of the square and saw the telekinetic splicer who killed Greavy. She was watching from the wall near the entrance to Artemis Suites. "They're closing in on us, Bill."
"Right. We'll take the better part of Valor and back off. Fast. Come on, mate."
They hurried back the way they'd come. They'd go the long way, through the checkpoint. They both had their ID cards, and then through the transparent passages between buildings to another bathysphere entrance to get to where they were going. Or they just wouldn't get there at all. The splicers didn't seem intent on pursuing them out of Apollo Square, which confirmed Bill's suspicion that they were somehow working for Atlas. They were remaining as his bodyguards. A word popped into Bill's mind as they hurried through the passage, striding under a passing pod of dolphins. It was a simple, one-syllable word, summing up what he felt was coming from the inevitable confrontation between this new Kingfish and Andrew Ryan. War. More killing. More war. More danger for Elaine and Sophie. Something had to be done to stop it. Somehow, it had to be diffused. A frightening notion came to him. He tried to dismiss it from his mind, but it lingered, whispering to him. Ryan Industries, formerly Fontaine Futuristics, 1958. "I really must get around to taking that sign down," Ryan said, as he and Karlowski walked under the words Fontaine Futuristics. "It's Ryan Plasmids now." He glanced at his watch. He was half an hour behind time. The lights would dim for evening soon. The message from Suchong had been urgent. A crisis in atom production. Ryan ignored the lab workers hurrying past, clipboards in hand, and hurried up the stairs, Karlowski close behind him. He rarely worried about splicers or assassins with Karlowski around. The man had eyes in the back of his head. He wondered if plasmids could make that literally possible. They went through the sterilization airlocks to find Suchong and Tenenbaum in a steamy lab, working over a sea slug in a bubbling tank. Frowning in concentration, Tenenbaum was using a pipette to draw an orange fluid from the sea slug's horny tail. Ryan noticed that her hair seemed to have not been washed in days, and her lab coat was splashed with stains, her nails black. There were blue circles under her eyes. Suchong glanced up as they entered and gave them each a short bow. Tenenbaum withdrew the pipette and released its contents into a test tube. Ryan stepped closer to inspect the sea slug. The creature quivered in its bath of seawater, but otherwise seemed almost lifeless. Ryan pointed at the sea slug. "Surely that's not the last one." Suchong sighed. "We have a few others in a suspension, but they are almost gone. The fighting of the raid, all the chaos. We lost them. Damage to the tanks. If only you'd warned us." "Couldn't risk that. You haven't exactly earned my trust, Suchong. Working for Fontaine." Suchong inclined his head in something that passed for regret. Suchong very sorry. Grave mistake to work for Fontaine. I should have known. The intelligent man work for men with more guns. Always the better policy. I will not make that mistake again. You have my loyalty, Mr. Ryan." "Do I? We'll see. Well, you sent for me, and I can see the problem for myself. No sea slugs, no Adam. Any suggestions, Doctor? What are we to do for Adam? We have all those lunatic Adam addicts running around. A whole industry could collapse. I've taken over the plasmids business, built the Hall of the Future to extol them. But if we run out of them, it's all for nothing." Tenenbaum looked up from the test tube. "There is a way, Mr. Ryan, until we can learn to breed more slugs." "And that is?" "Many men are dying and dead in Rapture. But before they die, there is, how would you say it? A stage in their metabolism of plasmids in which they create a refined
atom inside them. It is deposited in the torso, and we believe... She looked at Suchong, who nodded at Ryan. Yes, it can be harvested from the dead. Karlowski grunted and shook his head, but said nothing. Ryan glanced at him. It was hard to startle Karlowski, but it seemed they'd done it. Ryan looked back at the sea slug. You can get Adam from the dead. Suchong removed his glasses and polished them with a silk handkerchief. Yes, but there is a certain way to do this. The Adam must be sensed and drawn upon in the syringe properly and correctly transported. Little sisters are best suited for that process. Tenenbaum shook her head. But the girls are already damaged. If we sent them to do the harvesting, who will protect them? They are... She glanced at Ryan, then quickly away. They are worth a lot of money. They will not trust ordinary guards, and we cannot trust ordinary men with them. So for that, Suchong said, we have developed hybrids. Our cyborg sea workers, Gil Alexander, has made great progress with the Alpha series. Augustus Sinclair has leased this Johnny Topside from Persephone. Subject Delta. He is bonded with the girl we took from the Lamb woman. Eleanor Lamb. Bonded? Ryan asked, not sure he liked the sound of it. The girls are to be bonded to the Alpha creatures. They are to be surrogate fathers. Little ones, called them Big Daddies. Most charming. The girls will be conditioned to work closely with them. Tenenbaum made a small sound of acknowledgement. They do seem to need something. Some symbol of adulthood they can feel comfortable with. The conversation was getting ever more peculiar. Ryan wasn't sure he understood what they were planning, but he knew a solution was needed, and he liked the neatness of harvesting Adam from the dead. It closed the circle somehow, an unexpected link in the great chain. What exactly will you need from me? He asked, finally. Near Fighting McDonough's bar, 1958. This won't look too good, Sullivan thought. Me being in charge of the law enforcement in Rapture, and being the drunkest son of a bitch in Rapture tonight. He stood outside McDonough's tavern, swaying, wondering how late it was. Long after midnight, lights had already been turned down. Couldn't even make out his watch. How much money had he lost at the card table in the back room? 400 Rapture dollars at least. Poker. His downfall. Shouldn't have drunk so much. Might have folded some of those hands before they got expensive. Maybe shouldn't have gotten in the game. But his old gambling bugaboo was back, and with a vengeance. Only way he could get his mind off the mess that Rapture was becoming, and his failure to keep the splicers at bay. He was sure Ryan was starting to look at him like he was a useless old drunk. Maybe he needed to get married. Get married again. Yeah, a nice warm wife to keep him in line. He shuddered. A wife. How do guys like McDonough do it? He sighed and started towards the stairs. He just had his hand on the metal door to the ramp when he heard a boom from behind it and a keen whistling sound. Rogue splicers. The corridor was twisting around from booze and his mouth was paper dry. Too drunk to deal with this. Gotta get back up. He licked his lips and put his hand on the revolver in his coat pocket. But then again, he was top cop. Had to show it. Fuck back up. He drew his gun, opened the door, took 2 steps through, and was slammed in the chest by the force of a sonic boom plasmid. The sonic shockwave made him stagger back painfully hard against the doorframe. A leering, goggle-eyed splicer in a ragged t-shirt was crouched behind a tumble of crates.
Gotcha, big badge! Or should I say, big ass!
He pointed his hand to fire off another sonic boom, but Sullivan, sobering fast, slipped back through the door, taking cover to one side, and a cackling made him look up through the doorway to see a female splicer clinging fly-like to the ceiling, wearing only yellowed underwear and a brassiere, her long dirty hair hanging down like Spanish moss. She was pointing one grimy hand down at the sonic boomer and twirling her finger. A whistling sound became a windy roaring, and a small cyclone appeared, whirling bits of trash, picking up the empty crates to smash them against metal walls. She cackled.
Care to go for a spin?
The sonic boomer yelled and tried to scramble clear, but the expanding cyclone trap plasmid caught him, jerked him off his feet, and spun him like a rag doll in the air, dropped him with a thump. He yelled in outrage as the spider splicer giggled. Completely out of their gourds, Sullivan thought. 2 plasmids from 1 lunatic, Sullivan muttered, trying to get a bead on her in the dim corridor with his gun. She suddenly dropped down, landing cat-like, and spun to face him.
Puppet cop! Carpet pup! That's you!
She made a gesture, and suddenly a second splicer appeared, almost her twin, in front of her and to one side. Sullivan fired convulsively, and the bullet simply passed through the flickering image. A 3rd plasmid. Target dummy. She cackled again, then looked startled, her eyes widening. She looked down to see a curved, fish-gutting knife blade protruding under her breastbone, spurting blood. She toppled forward, dying, and the sonic boomer who'd stabbed her from behind leered and gestured. Sullivan was flung to skid down the ramp on his back. Dazed, he lay there a moment, staring at the ceiling, gasping for air. Then he sat up and looked through the open door about 4 paces off at what he thought was the splicer, sneaking around in the shadows. Sullivan got up, dusted himself off, put his gun in his pocket, and said, "Screw this." He turned and walked back to the bar. Hall of the Future, 1958. Diane McClintock was on one of her long, solitary walks through Rapture. She knew it was dangerous. She had a gun in her purse. She had 4 cocktails in her, too, and she didn't much care about the danger. She was heading somewhere in a roundabout way. Paupers drop, but she couldn't bring herself to go there directly. She was afraid Andrew might be watching her through cameras, through agents. She had to take the roundabout route, so he'd never guess she was going to get a close look at the man they call Atlas. She strolled through the museum, the new Hall of the Future with its videotaped displays glorifying plasmids. All quite ironic, considering some of the horrors plasmids had brought. She passed onward, footsteps echoing. She wandered through the livid, colored light of Rapture. She rambled past pistons pumping mysteriously in wall niches, past the streaming pool of the baths under iridescent panes of crystal, through high-ceilinged atriums of brass and gold and chrome, vast chambers that seemed as grandiose as any palace ballroom. A palace, that's what Rapture seemed to her, an ornate place of rhyanium and glass, swallowed by the sea, which was ever so slowly digesting it. And sometimes it seemed to Diane that everyone in Rapture had already died, that they were all ghosts, the ghosts of royalty and servants. She remembered Edgar Allan Poe's Sunken City. She read all of Poe in trying to educate herself to impress Andrew and the others. Again and again she'd returned to The City in the Sea. She remembered Poe's lines. Some seemed especially apt now. Resignedly beneath the sky, the melancholy waters lie. No rays from holy heaven come down on the long nighttime of that town, but light from out the lurid sea streams up the turrets silently, gleams up the pinnacles far and free, up domes, up spires, up kingly halls, up fanes, up Babylon like walls.
She sighed and walked onward, her head throbbing, still half drunk. Acting as if she went towards Paupers' drop on a whim, she passed through the transparent corridor and the metal door down a flight of steps. Sullen-eyed tramps lolled against the walls of the buildings under intricate scrawls of graffiti. They lay about, smoking, drinking, talking, and looking at her with an unsettling interest. Maybe it was time to take refuge in the Fishbowl Cafe. It looked civilized enough. She hurried into the cafe, sat in a booth by the dusty window, and ordered a coffee from the frowsy, gum-chewing waitress who already had the pot in her hand. "Sure, honey," the waitress said, giving her brown curls a toss. "You want some pie? It's sea palm pie, but they put a lot of sugar in it. Not too bad." No, thank you," Diane murmured, wondering if she could ask this woman about Atlas. The waitress bustled off to deal with the thuggish-looking man at the other end of the row of booths. Diane McClintock sipped coffee, looking out the window, hoping the caffeine would stop the thudding in her head. Risky being here, she could easily fall into the hands of rogue splicers, but her depression had been whispering to her. "It might be better if they got you." Still, Rapture was in a time of relative peace with Fontaine dead. She hoped it would last. Atlas was said to come to Paupers' drop pretty regularly. He moved about undercover. He was wanted for questioning by Sullivan's bunch. He was on track to end up in Persephone for sure. "Why am I here?" she wondered, but she knew. She wanted to see this man for herself. Her encounter with Margie outside Surprise, the woman's sincerity, had planted a seed. Andrew would hate her for coming, but that was part of why she was here. Atlas was a man with something Andrew Ryan was missing. A real heart. She was startled from her fulmination by a commotion outside. Several men with shotguns were shouting at the crowd of unemployed. They seemed to be getting them organized into a line. To her surprise, the ragtag crowd passively lined up. Then a man came striding into the scene, followed by several others carrying large baskets. The man in the lead somehow drew all eyes to himself. He was a handsome figure, with a fine head of hair, a mustache, a cleft chin, and broad shoulders. He dressed like a working man with a white shirt, sleeves rolled up, suspenders, simple work trousers, boots. But he carried himself like a man in charge. Yet there was no harsh edge of authority about him. His expression was kindly, compassionate, as he took a basket from the man behind him, began quietly passing out things to the people in line. The first one, a woman with gray-streaked hair and a lined face, a tattered frock, took the package, and Diane could read the woman's trembling lips. "Thank you. Oh, thank you." He spoke briefly to her and patted her arm, then passed on to the next in line, personally handing out a pair of shoes, a sack that seemed to brim with canned goods. Could this really be Atlas? The waitress came to Diane's table, asked in a bored voice, "You want some more of what passes for coffee around here, honey, or what?" "What I'd really like..." Diane took a $10 bill with Ryan's picture on it and tucked it into the woman's apron pocket. "Is to know if that man out there is who I think it is." The waitress looked around nervously, looked into her apron pocket, then nodded. With a lowered voice, she said, "Him? He calls himself Atlas. Only thing I know, the lady lives down the hall from me wouldn't have nothing to eat weren't for him. He's helping people, that one. Gives out free stuff every week. Talks about a new order." The waitress hurried off, and Diane turned to stare out at the window to the man they called Atlas. He was gentle but powerful, the kind of man she truly wanted to meet. She hesitated. Did she dare go out and talk to Atlas? Suppose Andrew were having her watched. It was too late. There was shouting, an alarm on the concourse outside the cafe. Constables were coming. Atlas waved at his charges, then hurried off around the corner. Her chance was gone. But she made up her mind.
One way or another, she would meet this man. She would stand face to face with Atlas. Fort Frolic Shooting Gallery, 1958. They were alone in the long, narrow shooting gallery, firing at man-shaped targets. The air smelled of gun smoke. Brass littered the floor. Bill stood just behind his wife, looking over her shoulder. "That's it, love. Take aim and shoot him right between the eyes." Elaine winced and lowered the revolver. "Do you have to put it that way, Bill? Between the eyes? It's just a paper target." Bill McDonough grinned ruefully. "Sorry, darling, but you said you wanted this for self-defense, and those rogue splicers don't play around." He put his hand on her shoulder and added more gently, "If you're going to defend yourself against them, you've got to shoot to kill. I know, it's bloody awful. It's been hard for me to shoot at these blokes, too." She grimaced and squeezed the trigger, blinking as the gun went crack. Bill sighed. She missed the target completely. "Right. This time, let out a long breath before you fire. Squeeze the trigger gently like and—" "Oh, Bill." Elaine lowered the gun, her lips quivering, eyes welling with tears. "This is so horrible. Having the... Mr. Ryan never said it'd be like this." Bill glanced at the door to see if anyone was listening. They seemed to be alone, but you never knew for sure anymore. "Bill, it's just... I can't raise Sophie here, in a place where I have to..." He put his arm around her. "I know, love. I know." She put her face on his shoulder and wept. "I want to leave Rapture," she whispered. "Elaine, darling, got to be careful where you talk like that." He licked his lips, thinking, "Listen to me, turning into a craven bastard. One thing at a time, love. Thing is, Fontaine's gone, but word is Atlas is making some kind of deal with the rogue splicers. He's got a lot of atoms stored up somewhere, got 'em working for him, and he's going to make some kind of move. He's not just handing out food and pamphlets, love. All of us on this side of the fence, we're going to have to defend ourselves. It's much more dangerous out there than ever." She sniffed and wiped her nose with a kerchief she took from his coat pocket. She took a deep breath and then nodded. "Sure. Okay, Bill. I just hope you're right about who we've got to shoot at." She lowered her voice to a barely audible whisper. "Far as I can tell, they might come at us from either side of the fence." She cocked the gun. "I guess I'd better be ready for anything." Elaine raised the gun and took aim at the paper outline. She let out a long, slow breath, centered the gun sights on the target's head, and squeezed the trigger. Bill McDonough's flat, 1958. It was Christmas Eve. Bill, Karlowski, and Redgrave sat around a card table in Bill's living room, playing poker in the light from the Christmas tree. 2 bottles, one nearly empty, stood beside a plate littered with cookie crumbs. Bill was beginning to feel he'd drunk too much. Sometimes the cards in his hand seemed to recede into the distance, and the room swiveled in his peripheral vision. "Wonder if this Atlas is going to be the problem Mr. Ryan thinks," Redgrave said, frowning over his cards. "All we got is rumors. That he's working with splicers, giving them atom. Where's he get all that atom?" A lot of Fontaine's supply seems to have done a vanishing act," Bill said, trying to see his own cards. "Were those diamonds or hearts?" "When they raided his place, most of the stuff was gone. Ryan's had Suchong hard at it making new stuff. Sometimes I wish he'd just let him..." He didn't finish saying he wished plasmids would run out completely. Karlowski might report that to Ryan, and Ryan was not in a mood to have his policies questioned. Redgrave raised the pot, Bill folded, and Karlowski called. Redgrave showed 3 aces. Karlowski scowled at Constable Redgrave and threw down his cards. "You black bastard, you cheat me again."
Redgrave chuckled and scooped up the poker chips.
I beat you. That's what I do. I beat you like an old rug.
Ugh, black son of a bitch. Shuffling the cards, Bill looked at Redgrave to see how he took Karlowski's invective. To his relief, he saw Redgrave looking gleeful, catching the tip of his tongue between his teeth as he stacked his new chips.
Not surprised an ignorant cross-act son of a bitch like you can't play poker. But a Russian not being able to hold his drink? That's sad, man.
What? Karlowski pretended to tremble with rage. Not hold a drink. He grabbed the unlabeled bottle. He had made the vodka himself from potatoes raised in Rapture hydroponics and poured the transparent fluid into their glasses, slopping almost as much onto the table. Now we see who can drink, a black bastard or a real man. Bill, you drink too.
No, I'm not a real man. I'm a married man. My wife will kick me ass if I come to bed any more blatant than I am.
He'd had 3 shots of crude vodka. More than enough.
He's right about that,
Elaine said, scowling theatrically from the doorway of the bedroom.
I'll kick him right out of bed.
Bill watched as Elaine went to adjust an ornament on the Christmas tree, yawning in her terry cloth robe. It was a curious thing how he could look at the face of his wife with her hair rumpled, her face without makeup, her bare feet under a terry cloth robe that was far from enticing boudoir wear, and still feel a deep desire for her. It wasn't the vodka. He often felt that way, seeing her about the flat. "Is nice Christmas tree," Karlowski said, toasting her. The small Christmas tree was made out of wire and green paper, with a few colored lights. They were the only Christmas decoration Ryan allowed. No stars, no angels, no wise men, no baby Jesus. "A secular Christmas is a Merry Christmas," went the poster, put up in Apollo Square right before the holiday. The poster showed a winking dad dropping a Bible into the trash can with one hand, while handing his little girl a teddy bear with the other.
Don't stay up too late with these drunken loudspill, Elaine said, rubbing her eyes, putting on a frown again.
"Huh," Karlowski said, punching Redgrave playfully in the shoulder. "His wife whips him like little boy, eh?" Bill laughed, shaking his head. "Sorry, love. We're about done playing cards." Her look of mock disapproval vanished, and she winked.
"No, you guys go on and play your cards. Have fun. I just came out to tell you not to be too loud so you don't wake Sophie."
Redgrave turned her a bright smile.
"Ma'am, thank you for having me to Christmas Eve supper. Means a lot to me."
He raised his glass to her.
"Glad you could be here, Constable Redgrave. Good night."
"Duh," Karlowski said. "Happy holiday, miss." He turned fiercely to Redgrave. "Now, drink up, you black bastard." Redgrave laughed, and they drank their vodka, clinking their glasses together when they were done. "Ah, okie dokie," Karlowski said, lowering his voice as Elaine went to bed. "We will play more cards, you lose more money to me, and we see if you can really drink. Black bastard."
"Cossack devil, pour me another."
Kashmir Restaurant, 1958. On New Year's Eve, Bill McDonough sat with his wife at a corner table of the luxurious restaurant near the wall-high window looking out into the churning depths of the sea. He glanced out the window. The illuminated skyscraper-style buildings seen through 100 yards of rippling seawater seemed to shimmy to the music, a Count Bay's swing number. Bill winked at Elaine, and she returned him a strained smile. She was pretty in her pearl-trimmed low-cut white gown, but despite all the care she'd taken, she still looked a bit haggard. Elaine didn't sleep well anymore. None of them did. Lately, a bloke trying to sleep in Rapture was always unconsciously listening for an alarm to go off, or the sounds of a security bot taking on a rogue splicer. It was chilly near the window. The tuxedo wasn't much protection against the cold, but he didn't want to sit any closer to the entourage waiting for Ryan to show up. A group at several tables near the fountain. Sandra Cohen was wearing a feathery mask and babbling madly away at a bored-looking Silas Cobb. Diane McClintock, wearing a gold party mask edged in diamonds, sat stiffly at a small table reserved for her and Ryan. She sat there alone, watching the door and muttering into her tape recorder. Ryan had gone on an errand to Hephaestus and was going to give some kind of New Year's address over the radio. "Well, love," Bill said, toasting his wife with the champagne glass, trying to pretend he was enjoying himself. "In just a few minutes, it'll be 1959. Elaine McDonough nodded slowly and forced another weak smile. The fear flared in her eyes, then dutifully hid itself again. She gave him the brave look that always tore at his heart. "It is. It's almost New Year's, Bill." She looked at the other tables, filled with revelers in jeweled masquerade costumes and masks. They were waving noisemakers, laughing, talking loudly over the music, doing their best to celebrate. Her gaze took in the bunting, the banners, the circular hot pink neon sign specifically made for the party. Happy New Year, 1959. "It's funny, Bill. All these years down here. Sophie growing up without seeing the sun. Now the war, and it's almost 1959. Time passes all funny in Rapture, doesn't it? It's slow and fast. Both." Bill nodded. Elaine was increasingly homesick and scared, but he just couldn't bring himself to abandon the man who had taken him out of the loo and made him a real engineer. Sure, Ryan was giving way to hypocrisy, but he was only human. And maybe it was true that Rapture had to go through this transition period before getting back on track. They just had to clear out the Atlas types, the worst of the splicers and Lamb's followers. He noticed Elaine staring around at the armed men, the constables standing guard near the walls. The guards weren't wearing masquerade masks, scores of gunmen there to protect this exclusive gathering from rogue splicers. Constable was the one job you could stand a good chance of getting if you were out of work in Rapture, because the mortality rate for constables was so high. Bill was glad to see Brenda bringing each constable a flute of champagne on a tray to get ready for midnight. Made it seem more festive. "A gun in one hand, a champagne glass in the other," he thought ruefully. "That's Rapture." He had a pistol under his coat. Elaine had one in her pearl-beaded white purse. "Do you think Sophie's all right?" Elaine asked, toying with her glass, looking anxiously at the clock. "Sure, she'll be fine. Bill, I want to go home as soon as we get past New Year's Eve. Like, at 12:05, okay? I don't like to leave Sophie with the sitter long in this place. I don't know if Mariska can use a gun, really. I mean, I left her one, but..." "Don't worry. We'll leave a few minutes after midnight, love." The Count Bay's song finished, and Duke Ellington started. Wearing their gaudy party masks, half a dozen couples were dancing in a cleared space between the tables. Forced smiles held stiffly on their faces. Bill wondered what music the rest of the world was listening to. Music in Rapture had to be outdated. There were rumors about something new called rock and roll. Trying to change Elaine's mood, he took her hand, pulled her to her feet, and got her dancing to the Duke Ellington number. They used to love to go dancing together in New York. Then the song stopped, simply cut off mid-tune, and the countdown started, led by a giddy Sander Cohen. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Happy New Year! Bill pulled Elaine close for the midnight kiss. That's when the explosion came. The doors exploded inwards, knocking 3 constables like rag dolls into the center of the room. Bill shoved their table over for partial cover, pushed Elaine to the ground behind the tabletop, and covered her with his body. Machine gun rounds ricocheted from the bulletproof windows to slam through tuxedos, to wound squealing women in their glittering finery. Elaine was screaming something about Sophie. Another bomb flew into the room and detonated. Body parts spun overhead, spraying blood. Auld Lang Syne was playing as machine gun bullets raked the room, as if the gunfire were part of the New Year's Eve revelry. Screams, More gunshots. Faces that seemed frozen, mocking. The invading splicers were wearing masquerade party masks, domino masks, feathered masks, golden masks. Andrew Ryan's voice came from the public address at that moment as he made his New Year's speech.
Good evening, my friends. I hope you are enjoying your New Year's Eve celebration. It has been a year of trials for us all. Tonight I wish to remind each of you that Rapture is your city.
Bill peered around the edge of the table, saw a splicer in a black mask yelling, "Long live Atlas!" Another, running through the cloud of smoke at the shattered doors, bellowed, "Death to Ryan!"
It was your strength of will that brought you here, and with that strength you shall rebuild. And so, Andrew Ryan offers you a toast to Rapture, 1959. May it be our finest year.
"Diane!" Elaine shouted. Bill turned to see Diane McClintock crawling past on her hands and knees, dazed face bloody. Her green dress had become red-stained rags. "Diane, get down!" he called. Beyond her, some of the constables were ducking behind the bar and grinning. Bill realized that some of them had been in on this. A security bot went whistling by overhead, firing at a thuggish splicer cartwheeling into the room. A nitro splicer in a fur-fringed white mask was throwing another bomb, which blew up on a table under which 3 men in tuxes crouched. Their tuxedos and their flesh mingled wetly in the blast. Bill hoped to God the rogue splicers had the common sense not to throw too many bombs near the windows. The windows were supposed to be blast-proof, but they could only take so much. "Come on, Elaine, we're off," he said gruffly, trying to get some steel into her spine. "And bring your purse." He tugged out his pistol, the two of them scrambling like doughboys under barbed wire till they were under one of the few tables still standing. A bleeding, thuggish splicer was crawling like a hungry alligator, laughing insanely, his mask down around his neck. Atom scars crisscrossed the man's face in livid pink that somehow matched the neon pink of the Happy New Year 1959 sign. Blood was pumping from a bullet hole in the crawling splicer's neck as he sang croakily.
"I'm a little hair, pulled off a chin, about to go into a spin, down the drain, drain, drain."
Then he noticed Bill and Elaine and whipped a hooked blade at Bill's face. Bill shot him in the forehead. The blade clattered on the floor. Elaine groaned at the sight of the dead man. They crawled onward. Bill risked a look over his shoulder and saw a group of loyal constables, including Redgrave and Karlowski, firing above an overturned table at spider splicers, crawling across the ceiling near the blown open doors. A red masked nitro splicer made a bomb fly through the air with the power of his mind. It flew past the table, then doubled back. Karlowski and Redgrave dove to the side, and the bomb went off. Redgrave rolled, wounded. A shotgun blasted nearby. Rizzo, firing over a table at the nitro splicer. The splicer's face vanished in a welter of red, and a grenade blew up in his hands, his body flying apart like a New Year's party favor. Bill crawled onward, one arm over Elaine, who crept along beside him, alternately sobbing and cursing. They'd reached the swinging doors into the back kitchen. "Okay, kid," he whispered in her ear. "On 3, we jump and run through them doors. Watch out for my pistol, love. I might have to fire it. 1, 2, 3. They were up and rushing through, Bill shouldering the door aside and firing at a spider splicer hanging upside down from the low ceiling. Wounded, the splicer fell off onto the stove, clattering into pots of boiling water and lit gas burners. Shrieking in pain, the splicer flailed and tumbled off the stove and onto the floor. Bill and Elaine rushed into the rear hall. Bill turned left. A gun banged just beside him. He turned to see Elaine pointing her own pistol, its muzzle smoking. Her face contorted with anger as a nitro splicer fell back. His head shot open. A grenade fell from his hands and bounced onto the floor. "Down!" Bill yelled and dragged her behind a steel kitchen cart, covering her with his body. And then the bomb went off. The cart caught the blast and slammed into them with the shockwave.
the steel cart cracking painfully into Bill's right arm.
Bugger in hell, that hurt.
Bill, are you alright? Elaine asked as the smoke cleared.
I'm okay. Except me bloody ears are ringing like a mad monk's church bell. Come on, we've got to get up, love.
They made their way dizzily down the smoking hallway, eyes stinging. Gunfire rattled behind them and explosions shook the floor. Other people were running from the kitchen. He looked back and saw Redgrave stumbling along, wounded in the leg, but game enough. Karlowski behind him, urging the wounded Redgrave along. Rizzo was turning to fire behind them through the door at splicers Bill couldn't see. A swishing sound, and Rizzo shrieked, a scream becoming a gurgle as a curved blade buried itself in his throat. Rizzo fell back, blood gushing over his tuxedo. Bill fired at the door. A masked splicer jerked back. Elaine kept tugging on his arm, shouting about Sophie. He let her urge him through the emergency exit to the stairs, and they saw a group of white-faced, scarred-looking constables a flight below, yelling up at them.
This way! Down here!
Hoping they weren't heading into a trap, Bill and Elaine went with the constables. A blur of corridors, passages, a checkpoint, another, waving ID cards, an atrium, an elevator. Time did indeed seem all funny, weirdly collapsed. A telescope snapped shut. And then, there they were, in their own flat, panting, Bill locking the door, and Elaine with a purse in one hand and a gun in the other.
"Hello,"
called Mariska Lutz, their sitter, from the next room.
"Back already? Have a good time?"
Rapture Central Control, Ryan's office, 1959.
It makes me half crazed to think of it,
Ryan said, voice trembling. He balled the report in his hands and threw it into a corner.
On New Year's Eve, the cold-blooded treachery of it. They expected me to be there. It was an attack on me, but it was also an attack on the heart and soul of Rapture. Our most accomplished men and women were in that room, Bill, celebrating the new year, and at least 6 constables betrayed us. We're lucky Pat Cavendish acted quickly. He shot most of the treasonous scum. But by God, we must root out any other bad apples.
He sounded bitter, but rational. Lately, Bill suspected that there was something twisted growing inside Andrew Ryan. Bill and Ryan sat alone in his office, Bill wishing someone were here to back him up. He had to say something Ryan wasn't going to like. Shifting in his chair, Bill rubbed his deeply bruised arm where the explosion had knocked the card into him. His ears still rang a bit. Elaine was haunted by nightmares.
"Mr. Ryan, this attack didn't come out of the blue. It's because you took out Fontaine. It's a reaction to that, really. People are saying Rapture doesn't mean what it used to. Nationalizing a business by force. It gave them an excuse to go a bit mad. That Atlas took the opportunity, lit the fuse of the whole bloody thing."
Ryan snorted.
It's not nationalization. I own most of Rapture anyway. I built it. I simply acted for the best interests of the city. Atlas is just another babbling Pravda, a tissue of lies he calls truth. If we let him take hold here, he'll be another Stalin. The man wants to be a dictator. If it's war, why then so be it.
"Mr. Ryan, I don't think it's a war we can win. It's the math. Atlas just has too many of them rogue splicers and too many rebels with him. We need to broker some kind of peace deal, Gov. Rapture can't take a revolution. This city's underwater, Mr. Ryan. It's in the North Sea. It's sitting on channels of hot lava. All that is... Crikey, it's so volatile. We're dying the death of 1,000 cuts from leaks already. But one major leak in the wrong part of Hephaestus, and we could have a hell of an explosion. Something as simple as any of that cold water making contact with the hot lava. In a pressurized area, the whole thing would go up. All this fighting risks exactly that kind of damage."
Ryan looked at him, his gaze suddenly flat.
His voice was flatter as he said, "And what do you suggest we offer them?" He closed his eyes and visibly shuddered. "Unions?"
No, Gov. A lot of these blokes worked for Fontaine. The others just want the atom, crave it. Let's hand over Fontaine Futuristics to Atlas's lot. It's not right to go against our principles, to nationalize, Mr. Ryan. We can take the high road, show them we stand for something. We can go back to the way we were and give up Fontaine Futuristics.
Give them? Ryan shook his head in disbelief. Bill, men died to take over the plasmid industry. They will not have died in vain.
Bill didn't believe for a moment that Ryan was concerned about who died in vain. That was just an excuse. Andrew Ryan wanted the plasmids industry. It was in his nature. He was a tycoon. And the plasmids industry was the biggest prize in this toy store.
Ryan Industries owns Fontaine Futuristics now,
Ryan went on.
For the good of the city. In due time, I'll break it up, but I'm not going to give it to that murdering parasite, Atlas.
Mr. Ryan, we've got to stop this war. It'll destroy us all. There's no place to retreat to. If we won't make peace with them, well, if that's the case, I'll have to submit my resignation from the council.
Ryan looked at him sadly.
So you're walking out on me too? The one man I trusted, betraying me.
I've got to show you how strongly I feel about this. We've got to make peace. It's not just Atlas. Suppose he makes a deal with Sophia Lamb. Her people are fanatics. Now she's broken, now she's twice as dangerous. Her mad little cult. It'll have a go at us too. We have to stop this war, Mr. Ryan.
Ryan slammed a fist into the desk so hard the room echoed with it.
This war can be stopped by winning it. It can be won with superior might, Bill. We can do more and better splicing. Use pheromones to keep control of our splices and have an unstoppable army of superhuman beings. We have the labs. Oh yes, we're short on Atom now, it's true.
He cracked his knuckles.
The little sisters we have left can't produce enough Atom, but there's Atom out there, in all those bodies. It lives on after the splicer dies. It can be harvested, Bill, and the little sisters are ideal for harvesting it. We can make this war work for us. We can be opportunity as well as catastrophe.
Bill stared at him. Ryan flapped his hand in dismissal.
It's written on your face, Bill. You've left me. You've always been loyal, but I'm afraid you will be a disappointment, like so many others. So many who've turned their backs on the grand vision. So many who've betrayed Rapture, who've soiled the glorious thing I've built with my two hands.
He shook his head.
The future of the world. Betrayed.
Bill knew he'd better turn this around fast if he hoped ever to see Elaine again. He could see that in Andrew Ryan's eyes. Ryan had only to call Karlowski or one of his other men and give the order, and he'd be in a cell. They might have lost control of Persephone, but there was always a lockup to be found, or an airlock to be thrown out of. He let out a long, slow breath, and then nodded. You're right, Mr. Ryan. I reckon I did lose faith. Well, he licked his lips. He hoped he was playing this right. I'll give it a lot of thought. Yeah, we'll find a way. He almost believed it himself. Ryan leaned back in his chair and frowned, looking at him closely. But Bill could see Ryan wanted to believe him. He was a lonely man. He trusted few people.
Very well, Bill. I need you. But you need to understand we're here now in Rapture, and we're committed, and we're going to do this my way. I built Rapture. I'll do whatever I have to, but I will not let the parasites tear down what I have built.
Bankers Row, near Apollo Square, 1959. Oh, bloody hell, thought Bill McDonough, seeing Anna Culpepper standing near the largest of Rapture's banks up ahead. Bill was walking along beside Andrew Ryan that frightened morning, and he knew what Mr. Ryan would think when he heard her singing. He'd heard her once himself, warbling in her new role as protest songstress, amazed that she'd gone from taking part in the council to condemning Ryan Enterprises for the new economic depression gnawing at Rapture's soul. Anna was standing on the street corner, singing to the frantic crowd, acoustic guitar in her hands. The overhead lamp flashed a golden glint from her earrings and played across her curly black hair. "While Rome burns, she fiddles," Ryan growled as Bill followed him down the passageway to within a few yards of the crowd surging around the first bank of Rapture. Karlowski and 2 other bodyguards, big men in long coats carrying Thompsons, were walking a couple of paces in front of Ryan. 2 others followed. The memory of the New Year's Eve attack was still fresh. Each wall along the passageway had its line of muttering, scowling customers, most of them in work clothes or rumpled suits, clutching paperwork and shifting from foot to foot as if they were in a long line for a urinal. A wispy-haired man in frayed seersucker was peering over the shoulders of the people in front of him, trying to see into the bank, shouting past a cup hand through the open door. "Come on! Come on! We want our money! Stop stalling in there!" There were murmurs when Ryan walked up. A few glared his way and elbowed one another, but no one wanted to be the first to confront him. "You could shut the bank down just temporary like, Mr. Ryan," Bill suggested in a whispered aside. "I mean, just for now, for a few days till the hysteria's over, and then we can reassure people." "No," Ryan said firmly as the bodyguards encircled him, facing outward, guns pointed at the ceiling, but ready to drop their muzzles on the crowd should it rush Andrew Ryan. "No, Bill, that would be interfering with the market. The fools have the right to withdraw their money." "But a run on banks, Gov, could be disastrous." "It already is, and they'll pay the price. The resulting market correction will send them scuttling for cover like rats from a hailstorm. I just wanted to know if it was true. See it with my own eyes. I can't interfere." "We could try to talk to him, right here." Ryan snorted. "Useless. I'll address them on the radio, try to talk sense, but there's no reasoning with a mob." Karlowski turned and spoke in low tones with Ryan, out the side of his mouth. "Let's get you out of here, Mr. Ryan." Yes, we'll go." But Ryan lingered, staring at the gathering crowd, people stalking from the banks, counting fistfuls of Rapture dollars as they went. More men rushing up the street, eager to withdraw their money. Word had gotten out that the war with Atlas and the Splicers was going to destroy the banks somehow, that they'd be targeted by the subversives. Bill wondered if Atlas himself had spread that rumor, deliberately sparking the run on the banks. A depression gave him a propaganda victory. Ryan's presence had quieted the crowd a little. The shouting and muttering had dropped to a droning murmur, and Bill could hear Anna Culpepper singing now. Something about Cohen, how Ryan's songbird was really Ryan's stable boy. "I've heard about this communist versifying," Ryan said to Bill with acid quietness, glowering at Culpepper. "Union song organizers singing folk music about the working man, as if a Red had even a passing acquaintance with working." Anna had spotted Ryan now, and Bill could see she was nervous. Her voice faltered as she looked at the armed bodyguards, but she licked her lips and resumed singing. Bill had to admire her courage. "So Anna's turned against me," Ryan said. "I'd heard something of the sort, but to go this far, singing a musical score for a run on the banks. I suppose she thought she'd find sheep for Atlas's flock here, or perhaps she's gone over to the other sheep, the lamb cult." He shook his head in disgust. "I've seen enough. Let's get out of here. I'll see to it the little red bird stops singing." Ryan Plasmids, 1959. The little girl watched, big-eyed, as the enormous metal man lumbered clankingly around the room, the sensors on its round metal head glowing. It was only a remote-controlled model, really. There was no man inside of it. Bridget Tenenbaum puppeted the clanking caricature of a deep-sea diver around the room from a control panel overlapping the training area. She had to be careful not to misdirect the Big Daddy model. It could run over the little girl like a freight train. Subject 13 was a small blonde child in a pink pinafore, her large azure eyes fixed on the Big Daddy. It was all part of the conditioning process. The girl had been treated with a drug that made her more susceptible to bonding with the creature that would be her guardian in the dangerous urban wilderness Rapture had become.
He's big and strong.
The little girl chirped.
He's funny, too.
Yes, Bridget said. He is your big, funny friend.
Can I play with him?
The child's voice was a little fuzzy from the drug. Certainly. Bridget made the Big Daddy model come to a sudden stop. Then she moved a lever, causing its right arm to lift, its hand to outstretch, reaching out to the little girl. There was something about the sight that stabbed Bridget Tenenbaum to the core.